Roki Sasaki will not be an opener. That feels pretty certain. He was officially posted this week, which means he now has a month to negotiate with MLB teams.
But of course, because of the rules involving him being considered an international amateur, assuming he does not sign until the next posting period opens, which based on what Joel Wolf spoke about, which we'll get into, that will not begin until January 15th, which means that in all likelihood, his official decision, what time he will be signing, will be sometime between January 15th and January 23rd. But based on what Joel Wolf said, it's possible we will know which team he's leaning towards before then.
For those of you uninitiated with Roki Sasaki, the elevator pitch is very simple. He is a 23-year-old pitcher from Japan who is really freaking good. He has had some injury issues throughout his tenure in the NPB, but the ceiling is comically high, and he's going to come at a very low price because he is labeled as an international amateur.
Yes. And what did we learn? So I think Joel Wolf, who also represented Yoshinobu Yamamoto last year and Kodai Senga before that, he, of course, is very experienced in this space. And, of course, we will talk a little bit about Scott Boras more later, but the reality is Joel Wolf is also in that inner circle of baseball agents. He has, of course, some of the other top players in the game, not just the top Japanese players. And so he kind of did this impromptu session at the winter meetings. It was, I mean, to our understanding, I don't know how much notice other writers got about this, but essentially he kind of walked in to the big media workroom and kind of gathered everyone around, because this is a situation where all 30 teams and all 30 beat writers and every market is interested in Roki Sasaki. And so Joel took questions for probably about 25 minutes. And what was the biggest thing that you would say you learned as he kind of talked through what the process is that is about to unfold?
If you're going to take Joel Wolf at his word, and I'm going to, because in my first interaction with him just now, he seemed like a likable gent. My biggest takeaway really has to do with the timeline. And that's because Joel Wolf, the agent, doesn't really know what Roki Sasaki wants yet, because they haven't sat down and communicated his preferences. And so when the members of the media were asking Joel, well, what does Roki think about this? Joel was basically like, I don't know. Like, he has not said that to me, so I cannot say that to you. And even if Joel Wolf knew what Roki wanted, I don't know if he would be telling all of us, understandably. But because of that, this is going to take some time, right? The meetings have not begun. The pitches are only just rolling in. And so Sasaki will have to flip through them. And because he is going to be courted by pretty much every team, it is likely to take the distance. He will not sign in 2024. He will sign in 2025.
Yeah. And again, just a little bit more on that timeline, because I would say that Joel Wolf did talk about, he did give some insight into Sasaki, the person, and some of the things, of course, that he's been through. And I think we should get into that a little bit too. But that timeline that we're talking about, if you're curious about when to expect, we're starting to hear about which teams are interested, which teams he's meeting with. He did say that first round of meetings could be starting as soon as next week. It sounds like Sasaki is coming to the United States at some point this week. Joel said that he's planning on finally meeting. Now, to be clear, it's not like this is the first time he's met with Sasaki. He's represented him, I believe he said, for 2 years. So this is someone that he's worked with before, but he has not started the conversations about what he's interested in terms of the next step of his career. And so the way he described it was meetings could begin as soon as next week. That's likely not going to be visits, but meetings, perhaps in the same way that, Juan Soto was holding his visits in Southern California at the Boras Corp. I don't know where that could be for Joel Wolf and Wasserman, but that is presumably going to happen somewhere in the United States. And then he also said that Sasaki is likely to return to Japan for the holidays. And then at some point after the new year, kind of go through a second round of meetings, which could potentially include visits to cities. So it's clearly going to be a thorough process. He said that the first piece of advice he would give to Sasaki, which is pretty cliche, but I think is important in this context, is to keep an open mind. And I think that is interesting too, because this is a situation where I was kind of amused where Joel said that it was the same advice he gave to Yamamoto, right? And I believe him, and that makes sense. But that was a different situation because only so many teams were going to be in position to give Yamamoto anywhere close to what he was worth. Whereas in this case, another interesting takeaway was, will the difference between 5 million and 7 million and 9 million or 3 million or whatever teams are able to offer him from their international bonus pools, he was like, he said, I would advise him to not necessarily, take a short-term financial boon now, which is like, oh, let me just go to the team that's giving me $2 million more now, because this obviously, based on the decision to come now and not in 2 years when he could certainly cash in, is a choice that you are playing the long game. And so he's trying to set himself up for success right now, regardless of what that bonus ends up being. That doesn't mean he's going to sign for $5, but it just means that it maybe is not part of the equation that we should be focused on too much.
The other incredibly revealing moment was Joel Wolf's response to a question about why Sasaki is coming over now, why he is opting to leave such gobs of money on the table to make the leap at age 23, where if he waited until age 25, he would be a normal free agent like Yamamoto, where he could sign for as much money as he wanted. And my takeaway from what Joel said is that the Sasaki situation feels different than the Ohtani one, even though the mechanics of it are identical. Ohtani was more, he had no worlds left to conquer in Japan. He had won a title. He had been the best player. He had pitched. He had hit. He had done it. And so there was something kind of, it was like, okay, I did this. I won this. I succeeded. I move on now. For Sasaki, it's more about living for today and taking advantage of the opportunity in front of him. And Joel said this, that's related to Sasaki's personal history, which is really tragic. He lost, I believe, his father and his grandmother in the tsunami in, I believe it was 2011. And because of that, he wants to live out his dream of playing in the US, playing in MLB. And he has the opportunity to do that now. And he could slip on a banana peel tomorrow and never pitch again. And so he wants to make the leap. And I think that that's going to inform his decision-making. The fact that he's making the decision at all will dictate where he ends up. How? We don't know yet.
Yeah, and I think that combination of his personal history, which of course includes that personal tragedy at a young age, and also, which Joel was also extremely transparent about, looking ahead and realizing the risks of pitchers, and him even knowing that, of course, it's easy for us to say, like, well, whatever, he could just sit on the couch and then sign for $200 million in 2 years. That might be true, that might not be. Realistically, if he continues to pitch in Japan and the injuries that he's had, like, who knows what status he would be in. I mean, you don't have to, it's not hard to find pitchers who seemed to have incredibly promising careers that not that long later suddenly were not, right? Like that, it's not that hard to find examples of that. And so because of that, I think he is recognizing that right now, this is an opportunity where he still had a good season. And obviously, by the way, if you haven't listened to our interview with Yuri that we did a few weeks ago with so much more insight into Sasaki, the player, and his whole career, like, go check that out. We don't have to review his whole career now, but he knows that this is still a next step. This is still an opportunity that he wants to do. And then he also talked about that, it was a difficult process, of course, getting to even have the opportunity to be posted by his team at this stage as well. And I have to say that is one other part about this that was compelling, because it came up multiple times, is that Joel spoke about how, and Yuri sort of touched on this, but I think it was interesting getting the perspective from someone who has spoken to Sasaki directly over these last couple of years, is that the media in Japan has been particularly harsh on him in the lead up to this potential decision to try and come to MLB, which everybody knew was going to happen at some point, but it was a matter of when. And him pushing for that and how that was kind of received in Japan specifically is something that was very difficult for him. And he was, again, Joel was extremely transparent, talking about how, like, that was wearing on him mentally. Like, that was not a fun experience. And that was kind of parlayed into a point later where he talked about maybe it would be better for him to be playing in a smaller market. He also said he feels confident that he would be able to handle a bigger market. But the point is that the experience of the last 2 years was not pleasant for him. And it would be a different kind of thing if he were to sign in New York or Los Angeles or whatever. But I mean, I don't think that's nothing. I mean, it's if he still ends up signing with the Dodgers or the Yankees, I'm not going to be stunned. But I thought that was compelling, and it was a reminder of how many teams are going to enter into this situation feeling like they have a really good chance. And I think that is why this is going to be one of the more unique free agencies we've ever seen.
And this press conference was fascinating. Just to peel the curtain back a little bit. We're sitting in the media workroom. We hear a rumble in the corner, and I just jet over there because I'm an intrepid young man. And I just assumed this was going to be Scott Boras. And so I hollered back to Jordan, Scobo.
No,
and
it was Joe-O.
Joe-O.
And we're not going to boot up the Joe-O Scobo quite yet. But I was skeptical just because when Boras talks, there's always the backdrop. He's got like the fancy logo, and that wasn't there. So it would have been a strange, like, we're obviously going to hear from Boras at some point here, especially if Soto goes official here on Tuesday. But it was kind of a nice surprise since we had no idea what was going on.
And this is maybe a little bit behind the curtain, right? But if you're listening to this, you probably care. Like, Boras is a showman, and Boras is turning everything up to 11 and doing the bit and squeezing every last drop of drama and theater out of whatever he does. Joel Wolfe was the opposite of this. It was a cannon blast of earnesty. It was very jarring. And it was clear that Joel was uncomfortable to like be up there in front of 75 people. Whereas when Boras is up there, like, he's got the smirk on his face and he's vamping, and it's, he's in his bag. So I thought that was compelling to see Joel Wolfe move in this space. And he opened it by saying, I'm very surprised by the amount of attention this is getting. To which I was like, Joel.
No. But see, I would push back on that a little bit because I can't speak to how exactly this was arranged, but he also, I also think just have to give him credit where it's just like, this was appreciated. Like, he understood that now that he has been officially posted, this is the person who's representing him and is going to speak about the situation and can lay out, not just to necessarily tell us, because from the beginning he said, I haven't spoken to him about potential fits yet, so it's not about that. But for him to give us as many details about what this timeline could look like, for him to say, yeah, he technically could sign immediately, but we do not expect that to happen. I appreciated that. And I think a lot of people who are interested in this process, I think it was nice to kind of hear from the person who will be handling the negotiations. So I appreciate his honesty. I mean, the one part about this process that he did not touch on, which isn't really his responsibility, but the reality is if Sasaki is going to be signing for a large signing bonus in the next signing class, that could have ramifications beyond in terms of the players who have already agreed to deals. Now, that is a messy process that I imagine we're going to learn more about as January 15th approaches. It's not really Joel Wolfe's problem, but it is a part of this story that we are going to have to keep an eye on. And I just want to mention that was not really discussed in this scrum, and I understand why, but it is a part of this story that we're going to continue to be following closely and explaining a little bit more thoroughly when we get there.